Welcome to lesson 9. In this lesson, we're going to actually develop two plugins. We're going to develop a local plugin and we are going to develop a repository plugin. And in doing so, we are going to look at the task API as well. So first of all, we are going to develop the local plugin. Now, local plugins are mostly suitable for things that do not fit into any of the other standard plugin types. Local plugins are always executed last, so all the other plugins are loaded and executed before local plugins are called, and even during install and upgrade. When you make a call to say get plugin types, the function get plugin types from the core, the local plugins will always be the last one in the list. So this makes local plugins suitable for supporting other plugins and doing things just before the UI is rendered. So we are going to develop a local plugin called Udacity_sync. In case you don't know what Udacity is a site where you can find training courses and programs to support your professional development. And I've done a search here for web development, and you can see there's quite a few courses here. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to use the REST web service. They provide a public API for their catalog, and we're going to synchronize the web development track of courses, these courses, with our Moodle. Okay. So let's get started with our plugin. So local plugins live in the local folder, and we're going to create a new folder called Udacity Sync, and I'm going to do the language files, language directories as usual. So we'll start off with our version PHP. So there's our version file as usual with the 3 required properties and our plugin's Frankenstyle name. So let's create the language file now. Which will be local_Udacity_sync. And here we go with our usual plugin name string defined. With local plugins, that's all you require, language file and version file, and you can actually install. And we're going to do that now. So I'm going to log in as admin. I'm going to install our plugin. And thinking ahead, we're going to sync the courses, the Udacity courses, with a category of courses. So let's create a category for these courses that we're going to synchronize. So if I add a category, let's call it web development. I'll leave that blank, which will just create ourselves a category. So that's our category where we're going to sync the courses to. Okay, so let's go back to our course, back to our code and carry on with development. Okay. So we need a way for the administrator to tell us which category they want the course, the courses synchronized in. So we'll need a settings PHP file. So let's create that. So this is our settings file. We have talked about settings files before, and we've actually used them now. This will be our 3rd time actually using them in the course. So what are we doing here? We've got the usual stuff at the top. We check if the user has site admin capabilities, and then I'm going to move that a little bit to open up the screen. Right, we create our new admin settings page called local Udacity sync, and we will need to define a string for it, and then I don't know where that came from. Okay, then what we do, we use the core course category function or class and ask it to give us a category list. So we get all the categories in the list, and we're taking the top level categories for this. Otherwise you could end up with a really long list. Anyway, top level categories, making the call with our make categories list, and then we add to our settings a new admin config select. So it's a select box, giving it a name and giving it a prompt and a help, and then having the category, the course categories as the options. Okay, so really we want that indented a little bit, don't we? Okay, so that's our config setting, and then we add that to the local plugins branch of the admin tree. Yep. So now let's define our strings. So these are our new strings. This title, this the prompt for the and the description of what we are asking in our settings. So let's upgrade our plugin, and let's go and see what that looks like in Moodle. So back in Moodle, let's upgrade. And like what happened the last time when we did use settings PHP, we then get asked for the settings. So here we go. Remember, we've talked about this before. If you use the other method of like extending the navigation and pointing to an external page, you don't get this kind of functionality for your settings. So we'll save that. We'll select our web development category, and we'll save the changes. Now our plugin is going to use the tasks API. It will be a scheduled task to do the synchronization. So let's have a look at the task API. Plugins can run scheduled tasks using the task API. Before Moodle 2.7, there were different ways to do this, and normally at that time they were referred to as the Moodle cron, following on the Linux way of doing scheduled tasks. Okay, now site administrators have more control over when tasks are run, and then they can even run the scheduled tasks outside of the set schedule, and control when the scheduled tasks run, etc., etc. So it is a much better system now. It is also possible to develop ad hoc tasks, but we're not going to cover that in this course. Right, so scheduled tasks are created by extending the scheduled task core class, and your classes need to reside, and your task classes needs to reside in the classes task directory of your plugin, and for auto loading, the class must be in the plugin's namespace. Only two functions are required for scheduled tasks: the getName function, which returns the name of the task, and execute. That's the function that actually does the work of the task. The return value is irrelevant and is ignored. You need to raise an exception if you want to raise an error, and errors are logged. Okay, an additional DB tasks PHP, so task PHP in the DB folder is required for tasks as well, and we'll look at that as we develop our own. And then if you want to have a look at the Moodle documentation for it, there's a link here in this presentation. So let's go ahead and create our scheduled task class. So we need new folders. So we need classes, task, and we'll create our task file. Let's go PHP file. I'm going to name this Udacity sync without the underscore, and we'll save that. And this is our file. Usual stuff at the top. We now namespace as required, and for auto loading the name of our file, the name of our class are the same, and we're extending the core task schedule task class. Okay, and then our two required functions, get name, which we will need to define a string for, and at the moment we'll just return true. Note the parameter here. There's a reason why I've done that, but on the command line, or when the tasks actually run, you can't pass parameters to the execute function. Okay. We need to get some data. Now, usually when I'm developing a REST plugin and calling another service on another server, I try not to overload the server while I am developing. So one of the things I like to do is download maybe even a sample of the data that I would be getting back from the service, storing it locally, do my development with the actual data that's on the disk, and then when I'm ready, when I think I've got it all sorted out, I then actually start using the actual REST interface. So I'm going to suggest you do the same, and then download from that link, download the course catalog, Udacity's course catalog, and save it to the folder on the screen, to a file in the folder on the screen. So basically in the same folder as our class, and you make sure that the web server can read it. Then we'll use that as we're developing our plugin, and then at in the final stages we'll actually make the REST call. So back in our course, we still need to define our task's name string. As you can see, I've downloaded the catalog JSON file. It's sitting there in the folder ready for us to get working on it. So let's define the string. So this is our string. We've just added the task name for our sync. Now we're going to take a little bit of a detour here and create an index.php file which will run the task without us having to complete the scheduled task requirements. This is just basically so we can test as we go along, and then when we finally get to the point where we complete the setup for a scheduled task, we'll be able to run it as a scheduled task. So let's create our index.php file. So this is our index.php file, usual stuff at the top, browser facing, so we have to require config php. We want the person logged in, and we are not letting anybody but site admin use this page. Then we do our usual thing for setting up the page, as we have already discussed this. I don't need to go through this stuff. We start our output, and what I'm doing right here is getting an instance of our class, so our Udacity class. We are writing out the task name, so we get the task name and we write it out, and then what we do is we call the execute method, passing 1 in for the testing flag, and we catch any exceptions, because obviously we cannot rely on the return from a task. We need to catch the exceptions, and if everything's okay, we notify, put out a notification of success, and we put out the footer. So now we've got that to let us run tests directly from the browser. Let's go back to our class and add in some functionality. So what have we done? We've filled in our execute function. Our name function stays the same. I've defined up here some private properties. One, the URL for the API, our testing file, which is our catalog JSON, and the track that we are going to to synchronize in the Udacity data. Okay, and then here we come to our execute function. Our testing now is true because we've passed in the 1, and then we start off by setting catalog to no. So we first need to check whether we've actually got a setting for our category sync. So right here we're checking to make sure that there has been a setting created for the category to which we are going to sync the courses. Then a little bit of stuff with the testing. So if we have testing and the file exists, then we decode the file, and that becomes our catalog variable. If catalog equals null, that means if there's been an error, we will get the JSON error. We'll get the JSON error, and we'll create an exception for it. And then we'll set testing to a Boolean value, true or false, if we're not testing. So we make sure we got Boolean values. Not that it's that important, but anyway. Right, so if we come out of this area without a catalog, we're then going to make a call, right? A call, and we use the testing param to determine whether we should use the caching, the curl caching. Now, I'm going to talk about this curl. This curl is not the PHP's curl. This is a class that's internal to Moodle. Moodle has defined its own RESTful curl class, which is based on curl, but it makes it easier to deal with for Moodle requests. You could, of course, use PHP's curl class if you wanted to, but this is a little bit of a wrapper. I mean, you could also use alternatives such as the file and file get contents functions. But this is what we're going down this road to use the Moodle functionality, and so we call the API. We get the response, and hopefully we can pass it. If we are testing and the testing file doesn't exist, I'll put in some code here so that it would actually then create a testing file in the folder. So that means even if you haven't downloaded it, the first time you run the index file, you'll get a test file ready for further testing. And then we have obviously try to catch our errors. And then with our response, with our catalog, the catalog that we've got from Udacity, we loop through it, check if there's a tracks, and if the track exists, we can then create a new course. So here we go. We create a new record. Basically, to insert a record in Moodle, you pass through an object that reflects the fields of the record that you are trying to create. So here we go. We've got ID number, the category, which is our web development category. We grab the title from the data, the slug from the data. We're using the short name as the slug as the short name. We get the summary. We do some clever stuff to try and include the text in there, and we create the format not as HTML but as Markdown. Okay, then we check if we've got an existing record. So our ID number, the cat course key, is what we use to identify courses. So we're using the key in the Udacity data to identify the different courses. So we're using that as our identifier, and then we then check if anything's changed. If it's an existing existing record, we check if anything's changed. If so, we say the update is required, and if update is required, we update course. So we set the record ID to the course ID, which we will have got from the existing record, and then we update the course. If not, if no update is required, we don't do anything. But if we don't have an existing course, we can't identify, we then create a course. These are core functions for courses. Okay. So now let's define some strings for our new functionality. Here's our strings all here. So now let's upgrade our plugin, and then we'll run it using the index.php file. Okay. So we'll log in as admin. Okay, so we haven't really given ourselves a way to navigate to the index file, so we will just do it here in the address bar. So it's local Udacity sync and then index.php, and then we've got our message saying it's successfully executed. Has it? Let's have a look. If we look in our web development, we have 34 courses set up here. Okay, so let's have a look at one of the courses. So we'll go down here. It's a little bit so there's not much in there. It's topics format by default, and no sections in there, just the announcements. So not much in the course itself. Now we could have done this differently and made it much more useful for the users. So really now this is not much. So let's say, for example, we made this a single activity topic format, right? And instead use the sort of, let's say, URL. This is one way of doing it. I'm not saying it's the only way of doing it. So if we did that and I go save and display, it will ask me for a name. So what we've got up there is JavaScript design patterns, and then we could put in the URL. This is from the data. I've just copied it from there. We could put in a description, right? And then you have various options for your URL. Where do you want it to open? Do we want it to be automatically determined? We'll leave it like that, automatic. Display the URL description, not really. URL variables, none that we want to pass through. Then we have our common module settings. Notice that this is different. See, there's the ID number, but in activities you get 3 fields in there. Restrict access, none, etc., etc. So that's all we needed to do. And then if we save that, what would happen is that when the person came into the course, they would get a link which they could click and then go directly to the course in the in Udacity. So can you see that's a much more useful way to do it than what we've done so far. For now, all I'm going to do is log out. So now back in our code, let's define our db tasks PHP file, which is now us integrating the scheduled tasks into our plugin into the scheduled tasks framework. So we'll create a folder first. We need the db folder, and then in there we're going to create a new file, PHP file called tasks.php. So this is our file with the usual stuff at the top, and then we define an array of tasks, and each item in that array is an array itself, an associative array, And okay, and this is the keys, the keys of the array. So we've got class name, which is our the class name of our function. Look at it, it is namespace auto-loaded class name. Another time where it's you have to use namespaces and auto-loading to get it to work. All right, we've got a blocking call, which is which, if set to true, blocks the others from running. And then we've got something that people who have worked with Linux will recognize quite easily. So we've got our settings for when the actual task will run. So the star means every. So we got at 30 minutes past 1 in the morning, every day of every month of every day of the week. So this is the default. Now, I mentioned before, and we'll see this a little later on, that can be changed by the site admin. So what we'll do is upgrade our plugin again, and let's go and have a look at what this does now in Moodle. So we'll swing back, up our version, make sure our task file is saved. So up our version, right, and let's go back to Moodle. So back in Moodle, we'll upgrade first. Okay. Okay, now we'll navigate to server in the site admin and look at our tasks. So look at scheduled tasks. So let's have a look. It's a long list, so what I'll do is I'll quickly just use the find. There we go. So there's our task specified. Okay, and then if you look here, you can actually click through, and then the site admin can actually change the defaults. So you get told when it was last run, when's the next run based on what you've got as a schedule, and you can change it. You can actually disable it, and if, let's say, you've changed it and you want to reset it back to defaults, you can set it back to default. So that's our task, and there's other information like reports and stuff, logs for the task itself. Okay, right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to run. It's actually possible in some if the site admin allows it, you can actually set it up so that the task can be run from the browser, but it's a separate setting. We're not going to do that. We're not going to bother with that. We are going to run this on the command line, how it will actually run when it's being run as a proper scheduled task. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go to our command line and run the task, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to log out of here for now, and let's do that. So on our command line, what we need is that command. So we're basically running as the web server user, calling PHP admin. So we run calling PHP, our PHP, and we are pointing it at the admin CLI schedule task PHP, and then we're telling it to execute our task. Notice the double backslashes there. That's because you need to escape backslashes on the command line, at least in Linux anyway. So we're going to run this. Let's see what happens. Right, so class curl not found. Okay, so this is one of the good reasons to actually do this on the command line when you're developing scheduled tasks, because what happens is that whereas curl is probably loaded when you're working through the user interface, curl is not on the command line. So we need to go and include that file. So back in our code, we need to go back to our class and change it. So what have we done? Basically, we've gone and included a couple of files. I wasn't quite sure whether course lib is loaded, so just to ensure that it is, we then required both files. Curl is defined in filelib.php. Now we could run this again, and let's see how that works. So back in our command line, let's run that again. And there we have it, completed the task. Okay, and this time this call was now made to the REST service because we haven't passed through a testing parameter. So that's it for this plugin. However, remember your index.php file, you might want to get rid of that or put something else in its place, or you could keep it. I suppose only site admins can run it and they need to know that it's there. They have obviously the option of turning on the scheduled task run from the UI if they wanted to actually do that. So it serves no real purpose. It served its purpose as our testing file. Okay, so this is it for this plugin. And now let's turn our attention and look at developing a repository plugin. So what I'm going to do is close all these files, and then we'll discuss repositories. So repositories. Repository plugins allow Moodle to use resources from external file stores. Okay, there are several repositories bundled with Moodle, and I know we touched on it in lesson 1 in our tour, but let's have a look again at our repository plugins. So if I go down here, we get to our repositories, and we can have a look and see all the repositories that come with Moodle. So only a few of them are enabled by default, and then the rest are disabled, and you need to enable them for you to be able to use them in your instance. So we've got things like embedded files, server files, recent files, not really a repository, more like a shortcut to files that you've used recently. Upload file, that's exactly where you need to do your uploads. So not really a repository, but upload your files into the internal Moodle system, URL download, and all that kind of stuff. And we've got things like Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, the S3 from Amazon, and stuff like WebDAV, etc., and YouTube videos. So those are the repositories that come with Moodle. So we are going to develop a repository using SlideShare from LinkedIn. Our plugin will allow the course creator the opportunity to actually include a SlideShare resource in their course. Okay, so let's log out. For this part of the course though, you need to do something, and that is to get an API key from the LinkedIn's developers an API page. The link is there. This slide will be in the lesson, so you can get to the link, and the link will be in the lesson as well. And if you want to look at the documentation, the SlideShare documentation for the API, there's a link in this presentation as well. So go ahead, get yourself a key from SlideShare before you carry on with this lesson. So let's get started creating our repository. So repositories live in the repository folder, as you can expect. We'll create ourselves a new folder called SlideShare, and we'll do the language folder at the same time. We'll start off with version PHP as we normally do. So there's our version PHP with the usual stuff in there, and our component name is repository _ SlideShare. Let's create our language file. Okay. This is our language file. We've got our plugin name, the usual one, but we have to define two other strings for repository plugins: config plugin and plugin name help. Yeah, okay. So with just these two files, we can actually install. So let's do that. Logging in as admin. Do our install. There's our plugin there. Now, if you remember, repository plugins need to be enabled. So let's see if we can actually enable our plugin as it is now. So back to repositories down here, manage repositories, find our repository. Where we got a SlideShare repository. Let's try and make it enabled and visible. Nope, we get a warning. We need a lib.php file, and there's no such file. So we need to go and define a lib.php file. Okay, so I'll go see if we can go back. So we'll set this back to disabled, and we get an error because obviously we haven't still got our lib file. And let's go and create our lib file. Okay, so let's create our lib.php file. So new lib.php. So this is our lib.php, the usual stuff at the top. So we've got our repository SlideShare, which is our Frankenstein name, extending repository. Okay. So here we have the construct function. Documentation says you must override it, but in practice doesn't seem to be required. But I've put it in anyway. And you have to call the parent construct at the end of that function. So we've got the repository ID coming in, the context ID, options, and whether it's read-only. And the possible options array items is Ajax, to determine whether this is to do with the Ajax. It says Boolean, true if the user is using the Ajax file picker, and we've seen the file picker many times, and MIME types, the type of files that are accepted, and you call your construct. As you can see, I'm not really doing anything in the function except calling parent, so means I didn't really need to define the construct function. But anyway, the main function, the main method of your repository class is getListing. This is where we send back the files, and getListing gets a path come in and the page, so you always know where you are in your listing in terms of page, how far into the listing you are, etc., etc. So at the moment we just return an empty string. Now on top of this lib.php file, we need to define a capability for users to actually view the repository. So let's go ahead and create a db access file. So we've got a new folder, db, and in there we define our access file. So this is our file. We've come across db access files before. So our capability is SlideShare view. It's a read capability. It's at the context of a module, and the archetypes that get the permissions are course creator, teacher, editing teacher, and manager. So all these users can actually use the view the repository and use it to add resources to courses. So we also need to define a language string for our capability. So let's do that. And there's our language string, SlideShare view the SlideShare repository. So another useful file, not really required, but makes it fit in with all the other repositories, is a little icon for our repository, and that needs to live in the pics folder. So a folder called pics, and then you put your icon in there. Now I've minimized, I've made a little icon, 16 by 16 pixel icon, out of the SlideShare icon itself, and you can download the icon in the lesson. I'm going to put my icon in off screen, and then we'll carry on with our development. So there's my icon put in the right place, and let's swing back to our lib.php file and add a little bit more functionality in here. So I've added in another function called supported return types, and we're returning a constant file external. Now we've spoken about file external and file types previously when we looked at the file API, but we're just going to refresh our memories. Now another function that I could have defined would be the file types, and that again we've discussed before what that could be, and we're going to accept the default of all. Not quite sure what the SlideShares, the format of the SlideShares actually are. So let's look at the at these return types and file types. So like I said, we actually looked at this presentation before. So the file types are defined in our repository/lib.php, and so files that are uploaded, the stuff we've been working with previously, has been file underscore internal. Now we are dealing with file type file external, and then there's the variations, the file underscore reference, which is an external file but can be cached, and our file control link, which I really don't understand as such. Okay, and then from the supported files, we have this concept of you can have them in groups, or you can use the extensions to define your supported file types. Okay, I'm not going to go into any more detail because we have discussed this before. So back in our code. Now, repositories plugins have options as opposed to settings, and have specific lib.php methods to deal with those options. There are two types of options. They are global options and instance options. So very similar concept. You can have global settings, and then you can have settings for the particular instance, like how we discussed, let's say, with our block plugin. Okay. So by default, a system-wide instance of a repository is created when the repository is enabled. So and I'm going to do something in the language file now, and then we'll discuss a thing a way of setting our some of these options. Okay. So I'll go to our language file and I'll do something here. So what have we got here? We have created two strings: enable course instances and enable user instances. So these are options that can be used to allow the users, the ones who can add repository instances in courses, and users themselves may also be able to use instances in the user context. Okay. Now you can define them here in your language string, right, which is the easiest way to do it, or you could have used a method called getTypeOptionsNames in your lib.php file, and then pass back the two options to allow course instances and user instances. Now there's a third way in which you can define options. Several core repositories use the db/install PHP file to create the original repository instance. And now I've only seen that in the core. I don't really understand why they would do it, but apparently some of them do have to do it that way, probably because they enabled by default. So you can look at some of the files for examples. But the two main ways of determining these two options anyway, you can have other options, but these two options as to allowing course instances and user instances, this defining the strings is the easiest way. Now we're going to look at another way of doing things when we look at the instance options. Okay. So let's go back to our lib.php file and add some more functionality. So I've added in a function, get type options name. It needs to be static, must be statically defined, and what happens is you return your options in an array. Okay, but you need to make sure you get the parent type options as well to ensure you've got all the options defined. Okay, now we could have defined those two language strings in this function as well, but that gives you an example of doing it slightly differently. But we do need the API key, we need the API secret, and we need the files per page, and this is these are global options. Now we need to think about how we actually get this information. So we need another function. So let me add that in. So I've added in a function, type config form. Okay, and this function gets in a form, the Moodle form, and for some reason you need to define a class name. So it says to avoid PHP warnings. I found this out the hard way. You need to stipulate the additional parameter with the default value of repository. Okay. Note again, also statically declared. Okay. So we get the parent type config form here. Then we then start to add our options. Okay, so we get our configuration options. So these are the current options. When this is saved, we setting the configuration. So we check for the current settings, and then we create our form elements, the usual stuff. And if our current options have settings, we then set defaults for those for each of the fields to the current options value, and we obviously add in the usual stuff. This is just this usual form. So this will ask for the API key, that will get the API secret, and this will be the files per page. And our default, we're setting ourselves a default of 20 if we haven't got a current setting, but if we do, we set it to the current value for files per page. Okay, and so this is our type config form. We could have also defined another function, type form validation, to validate the data that's coming through there, but we're not bothering with that in our plugin. As normal, we need to define some language strings for our form. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have our strings there for the form, things like the prompt for the key and the secret. Yep. Okay. At this moment in time, our repository is global. For us to be able to allow instances to be created, we need to do some more code. So let's go back to our lib.php file and add some more functionality. So we've added in two more functions. Get instance option name, kind of mirrors what we've got in terms of the get type option names. So this is instance option names. So in our instances, we're going to have the search term and the results per page. Those are the options that we are going to define for each of the instances. And then we've also got to create the form to collect this details. So we get a form through there in our function. All these functions are static, note that. Okay, so we've got a search term, so we've got a field for the search itself, and then we have the results per page element as well. Now results per page will overwrite the files per page, override the files per page setting in the global. It's an idea of how things work, just an example of how you can get things to work differently between the global and the instance options. Okay, right. As normal, we've got to go back to our language file and add some language strings. So we have our language strings being added here, only 2 more language strings that needed to be defined. So having done all that, let's upgrade our version, and let's up our version and upgrade our plugin, and let's have a look at what happens in Moodle. So back at Moodle, let's upgrade. So we'll continue. See our little icon there showing up, and we'll go ahead. So now let's go and try and enable our plugin again. So we go plugins, repositories, manage repositories. Let's find our slide share somewhere down here, isn't it? Right, enabled and visible, and then we have our options come up. So we have our repository name, we just call it slide share. Default it will use the I'll leave it empty and let it use the default, so you see what it is. So now this is where we will enter our API key and our shared secret and define our default results per page, like 30. And then this is our 2 options, global options: allow administrators to add an instance into the course, allow users to add into their user context. So it's up to you, you can have both. So let's tick both, add in your details in there, and then we'll carry on from there. And so once you've saved it, we've got it enabled and visible, and you can see here we've got no site-wide common instances, no course-wide common instances, and no user private instances. So now if we try to add a repository, a SlideShare repository to a course or whatever, we would have nothing coming up in the repository because we haven't finished off our get listing method in our lib.php file. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we can actually see the repository in action. So I'm going to log out. And let's go back to our code. So back in our code, let's go back to lib.php, and we're going to put some meat on our get listings function. So let's go through it, okay? So every time get listing is called by the file picker, you'll get the path, so you have an idea. Think of it as just like browsing directories, etc. So you'll have your path where the user has decided to go, and you'll have the page in case you have many results and you're only showing several results at a time. Okay, we get our options, which is the options, our options, and for some reason we seem to have to get the config. We have to get the type config. I'm not quite sure what's causing that issue, but that's how I resolved it. Okay, and then we get the time. We get the options, the search term. So these are the instant options, and we determine what page we're on. So if we have no page coming in, we can only assume that that's page 1, and we then decide how many items per page based on whether the results per page is actually set. Okay. So what we're doing here, this actually should be on the same line, is basically results per page or files per page, depending on if it's set to that, that's how many items will be. If it isn't set, then files per page will be the value of our items. Okay, and then we've got an API URL to actually call the SlideShare API. That could have been a property, it could have been actually even an option in our setup, but for now I've hard coded that in. Okay, then we build up our request, our API. Now this has to follow the API, the documentation, the SlideShare documentation for making a query on the using the API. So we've got the API key, the timestamp, hash that hashes the API secret with the timestamp, the query itself, the search option, the page number, and then the items per page. Okay, and then that's built up into a URL. Yep. I'm not quite sure why I had to define this, but for some reason it didn't seem to work. I had to actually tell HTTP build query to use ampersands. Okay, then instead of using curl, etc., I went with simple XML load file. Could have used file get contents, could have used file, etc., but I went down the road of using that to get the contents because the return is XML. So if there's no contents, we'll obviously try and catch the error, and if it's not empty, if empty, the what have you, we know that we don't have an error. If there is something in that if there is that property defined in our contents, then we'll know we have an error instead. So we then now define our results to show in the page. Okay, and we basically got so these are sort of like the global things for the actual listing. So no refresh, no search, no login. If you set these to false, then there's more icons shown in the browse in the file picker to allow you to refresh or to do a search or whatever. So, and list is where the list of files will go. So we've got that ready to go, and then we go through each of the slideshow results. We turn it to an array so it would be an object, but we turn it into an array. We do some stuff with the thumbnail, the thumbnail, so we can actually use the thumbnails, and then for each of them we add them to the list. So we need title, date modified, date created, the thumbnail width, thumbnail height, and the URL for the actual slide share. Okay, and those all go into the list array, and that will be your results. So you return those results. Okay, otherwise you throw an error if there's an error message in your slide share contents, and that's the end of the story for us. Okay, so now what we're going to do, let's save that, make sure it's saved. We're going to upgrade and then I will upgrade on the command line, and then we're going to log in as a teacher and see how we can add an instance to a course. Okay, so let's do that. So let's go and up our version. I'll go and upgrade on the command line, and we'll go back to Moodle and log in as a teacher. So having upgraded, I can now log in as a teacher. Okay, so let's pick a course. Let's go into our banner course, and let's turn editing on. And if you look now, because we've got repositories, I've got an option here for repositories. So I'll go in there and I can create a repository, SlideShare repository instance, right? I can give it a name, so I can call this bhat slides, and then enter the search term bhat. How many results we want per page? Let's make that 25, and then we can save that. Okay, so we have a repository in there. So how do you add it in? So if we go back into the course again, and then let's say we want to add an activity or resource. Let's add an activity or resource. So along here, and what we'll do is let's use the URL. Okay. So I'm not going to fill this in. I'll just show you the repository. So we've got our repositories here, the ones that are available to us, and we have our bhat slides, and we can select one of these. Now I know there's an error if I try and select one of these, I get an error. Not quite sure what the error is, but this gives you an example of what the repository should do. It might have something to do with the URL, but for this lesson, I think that we've covered the base information that we need to create repositories. Okay. That is it for our repository plugin. I mean, it needs a little bit more work, but we're going to leave it at that now. I'm going to log off and we are going to review what we've done in this lesson. So that's it for lesson 9. In this lesson, we developed 2 plugins, a local plugin and a repository plugin, and we had a look at the task API.